Welcome to the Deep Sleep Science channel. Tonight, we gently step into the quiet mystery of ancient Egypt, a world that rested in silence for thousands of years, its temples buried in sand, its language unreadable, and its stories waiting patiently to be heard again. For a long time, no one could understand the writing carved into stone walls and hidden inside tombs. The symbols were beautiful, but they were silent. Then, everything began to change with the discovery of a single object, the Rosetta Stone. It carried the same message written in different scripts, and over time, careful study allowed scholars to slowly unlock the meaning of hieroglyphs, sign by sign, sound by sound. As the language came back to life, so did the voices of ancient Egypt. Temples began to speak again. Tombs revealed their stories, and everyday people through simple notes and records quietly returned to history. Archaeologists uncovered cities, tools, and even preserved food, allowing us to see not just the grand monuments, but the gentle rhythm of daily life along the Nile. So tonight, as you relax, let yourself drift into this rediscovered world, a civilization once lost to time, now slowly understood again. One symbol, one story, and one quiet discovery at a time. The Great Pyramid at Giza was built for Khufu, and for many centuries it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth. That single fact becomes even more striking when you imagine a world without modern cranes, engines, or steel frameworks. For a very long time, human beings looked at that pyramid as the highest thing people had ever raised toward the sky. Pyramids were royal tomb monuments, but they were also much more than burial places. They expressed ideas about cosmic order, sacred kingship, and the special connection between the ruler and the divine world. In other words, a pyramid was not only a giant structure of stone. It was also a statement about how Egyptians understood the universe and the place of the king inside it. The Great Pyramid was part of a much larger complex that included temples, smaller pyramids, and a carefully planned funerary landscape. This means the monument was never meant to stand alone as a single mysterious object in the desert. It belonged to an entire sacred setting, where rituals, processions, and offerings surrounded the dead king with a complete world prepared for eternity. The Giza Plateau also includes the pyramids of Khufu and Menkaure, so the site is really a dynastic cluster rather than a lone wonder. When people picture Giza, they sometimes think only of one great pyramid, but the plateau is actually a royal landscape built across generations. The group of monuments shows continuity, family ambition, and a shared plan to place kingship in stone. The Great Sphinx was carved near the pyramid complex of Khufu and combines the body of a lion with the head of a ruler. That mixture of animal strength and royal intelligence gave the monument a powerful symbolic presence. It is one of the clearest examples of how Egyptian art could combine nature, kingship, and sacred meaning into a single image. The Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara is one of the earliest large stone monuments in world history. Before later smooth pyramids rose at Giza, this structure already marked an enormous leap in architecture and planning. It shows that very early Egyptian builders were already thinking on a scale that would influence the rest of ancient history. Djoser's pyramid complex is associated with Imhotep, a famous official later remembered as a man of exceptional wisdom. His name remained so respected that later generations treated him almost as a legendary figure. That lasting memory shows how strongly Egyptians admired intelligence, planning, and the ability to turn vision into enduring form. The Step Pyramid began as a mastaba tomb and then expanded into a stacked monumental structure. That transformation reveals that Egyptian architecture did not appear fully formed all at once. Even one of the most famous monuments in history began as an older, simpler tomb type and then evolved into something much more ambitious. The bent pyramid at Dosheer shows that Egyptian architects experimented with angle and stability while developing the pyramid form. Its changing slope is like a stone record of learning in progress. Rather than proving failure, it shows that Egyptian builders were testing ideas, adjusting methods, and refining monumental architecture through experience. The Red Pyramid, also at Dosheer, is one of the earliest successful smooth-sided pyramids. It represents an important step in the path toward the fully developed pyramid form most people recognize today. In a quiet way, it shows that greatness often comes from gradual improvement, careful correction, and repeated effort. Tutankhamun became famous in modern times partly because his tomb was found with an unusually rich collection of surviving grave goods. Many royal burials had been disturbed long ago, but his preserved burial gave the modern world an extraordinary glimpse into elite Egyptian craftsmanship, ritual, and belief. It was not only the king himself that amazed people, but the sense of a sealed ancient world suddenly opened again. Tutankhamun's burial mask is made of gold and has become one of the best-known objects from ancient Egypt. The mask is so recognizable because it combines beauty, symbolism, and technical skill in a single face. Gold, color, sacred imagery, and idealized royal features all come together in a calm but unforgettable image of eternal kingship. Abu Simbel, with its colossal seated statues, was built to project royal authority in Nubia as well as within Egypt. These huge carved figures were meant to impress viewers long before anyone stepped inside. Their scale tells us that Egyptian rulers used architecture not just for memory, but also for presence, power, and political communication across distant lands. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is a masterpiece of terraced monumental design set against western cliffs. The building seems almost to grow out of the landscape, with strong horizontal lines balanced against the rising stone behind it. It is one of those places where architecture and setting work together so perfectly that the whole scene feels carefully composed. Ramesses II ruled for decades and covered Egypt with monuments that reinforced his image on a grand scale. His long reign gave him time to build, inscribe, and reshape the visual landscape in a way few rulers ever could. Because of that, his presence seems to echo again and again across Egyptian sites, as though he wanted history itself to keep repeating his name. The Battle of Kadesh under Ramesses II is one of the best documented military confrontations from the ancient world. This makes it especially valuable because so many ancient battles survive only in fragments or later summaries. In Egypt's case, inscriptions and imagery preserve a detailed royal version of the event, showing how warfare, memory, and public image could all be woven together. Akhenaten attempted a major religious shift centered on the Aten, the solar disk. This was not a small adjustment inside an already familiar system. It was a dramatic attempt to reshape worship, royal identity, and the role of divine power in Egyptian life, which is one reason his reign still stands out so sharply from those around it. Akhenaten founded a new capital at Amarna, and that city has become one of the most revealing archaeological windows into a planned Egyptian urban center. Because it was built for a special purpose and later abandoned, it preserves a very unusual snapshot of life, work, worship, and government. It lets historians study not only royal ambition, but also streets, houses, workshops, and ordinary activity. The Valley of the Kings became a major New Kingdom royal burial ground, partly because hidden rock-cut tombs offered a different strategy from giant visible pyramids. Instead of placing royal burials inside enormous public monuments, Egyptian rulers chose secluded tombs cut into the cliffs. This change suggests a different balance between sacred display, protection, and royal afterlife planning. Ancient Egypt developed along the Nile River in northeastern Africa, where dependable floods created one of the most productive farming corridors of the ancient world. Without that river, the civilization could not have taken the form it did. The Nile gave water, fertile soil, transport, and rhythm to life, making it the quiet foundation beneath nearly everything Egypt became. The Nile flows from south to north, which is why Egyptians described Upper Egypt as the southern region and Lower Egypt as the northern one. At first, this sounds backward to modern ears, but it makes perfect sense when you follow the direction of the river itself. Egyptian geography was shaped by the Nile's movement, not by the top of a modern map. Egyptian history is usually divided into major periods such as the early dynastic period, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and later ages of foreign rule. These divisions help us understand change across very long stretches of time. They show that ancient Egypt was never one unchanging block, but a civilization that rose, adapted, fractured, reunited, and transformed many times. The political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt is traditionally associated with Nama, an early king remembered near the beginning of dynastic history. His place in Egyptian memory marks a foundational moment when separate lands were understood as one kingdom. Whether viewed politically or symbolically, that union became one of the core ideas behind Egyptian kingship. Ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, meaning the Black Land, referring to the dark, fertile soil left behind by the Nile flood. The name reveals how closely they tied identity to the productive earth that sustained them. It was a civilization that understood its own life through the color and richness of river-fed soil. The surrounding desert was often contrasted with the fertile floodplain and seen as a harsher red land beyond cultivation. This contrast was not only physical, but also deeply meaningful. Egypt existed between two worlds, the narrow, life-giving strip of black earth and the vast dry zones that reminded people how precious the river valley really was. The annual inundation usually rose between about July and October because of rains far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands. So even though Egyptians lived in northeastern Africa, the fate of their fields was connected to weather patterns far beyond their immediate horizon. That quiet connection between distant rain and local survival was one of the great hidden systems behind Egyptian life. After the floodwaters withdrew, they left behind silt that renewed the fields and reduced the need for artificial fertilizers. In simple terms, the river refreshed the farmland again and again. This natural renewal helps explain why the Nile Valley could support dense populations and long continuity over so many centuries. Much of Egyptian life depended on reading the Nile correctly, because floods that were too low or too high could threaten crops and stability. A good inundation brought abundance, but a poor one could ripple outward into hunger, economic strain, and political trouble. So the river was generous, but it also demanded careful attention. Egyptian farmers organized their work around a three-season cycle tied directly to the Nile: inundation, planting, and harvest. This means the calendar of labor followed water first, then growth, then gathering. Agriculture was not simply a list of tasks. It was a repeating rhythm shaped by the river's seasonal behavior. The Nile was Egypt's main transportation route, allowing heavy goods to move much more easily by boat than by land. In a long river kingdom, this made an enormous difference. Stone, grain, wood, people, messages, and ritual goods could all travel along a natural corridor that connected distant parts of the country. River travel was helped by the natural pattern of current and wind, because boats could drift north with the current and sail south against it using prevailing winds. This gave Egypt an unusually practical transport system built into nature itself. The river moved one way, the wind often helped in the other, and together they made two-way travel remarkably efficient. Settlements tended to cluster along the narrow strip of arable land beside the river, because desert lay beyond it. That meant Egyptian habitation was concentrated, almost ribbon-like, along fertile ground. The pattern shaped not only farming but also roads, local ties, administration, and the visual feeling of civilization pressed close to water. The Nile Delta in the north supported dense populations and many channels, while the valley farther south was narrower and more linear. These two landscapes created different regional experiences within the same civilization. One sped outward in branching waterways, while the other followed a tighter line between cliffs and riverbanks. Cataracts, or rocky stretches of the Nile, shaped travel and trade, especially between Egypt and Nubia. They acted as both obstacles and strategic points, influencing movement, defense, and exchange. Geography in Egypt was never just background scenery. Features like cataracts could shape politics and economy in lasting ways. The ruler of Egypt is now commonly called pharaoh, though that word originally referred to the royal court or great house before becoming a title for the king himself. This change in meaning is a gentle reminder that language evolves over time. Even the title we use for Egyptian kings carries a history of its own. Egyptians viewed the king as the upholder of order, not merely as a political leader. He was expected to preserve stability, justice, and right relationship between the human world and the divine one. In that sense, kingship was not just about ruling people. It was about maintaining the balance of existence itself. A central concept in Egyptian thought was ma'at, a word connected with truth, justice, balance, and proper order. It described the condition in which the world functioned as it should. When Egyptians spoke about good rule, moral conduct, or cosmic stability, they were often circling around this deep idea of ordered harmony. Royal power was expressed through both religion and administration, so sacred duty and political authority were closely linked. The king did not stand in one world as a ruler and another as a religious figure. Those roles blended together, which helps explain why temples, rituals, monuments, and state control were so tightly connected. Egypt's crown symbolism reflected unification, with distinct crowns representing Upper and Lower Egypt. These crowns were more than decorative headpieces. They visually declared that the king held together lands with different geographies, histories, and regional identities under one royal authority. The vizier was one of the highest officials in the state and oversaw major areas of administration, law, and record-keeping. In a kingdom this large and long-lasting, someone had to coordinate the machinery beneath the ruler. The vizier stood near the top of that system, helping transform royal power into practical governance. Scribes were essential to Egyptian government because taxes, labor, storage, correspondence, and religious texts all depended on writing. Their work turned speech and memory into organized records. Without scribes, the state could not have managed resources, preserved rituals, or directed large projects with the same precision. Egyptian bureaucracy was one of the main reasons the state could organize major construction projects and manage resources across long distances. Monuments may be the visible result, but administration was the hidden framework beneath them. Paperwork, planning, oversight, and record-keeping allowed grand ambitions to become reality. Provincial officials governed regions known as nomes, which functioned as administrative districts. This meant Egypt was not ruled only from the center in a vague or symbolic way. It was divided into manageable regions, each with local responsibilities that linked the countryside to the wider state. Temples were not only religious centers, but also economic institutions that controlled land, labor, storage, and redistribution. They were places of worship, but also places of management, accumulation, and social organization. In Egypt, the sacred and the practical often lived in the same buildings. Egypt's earliest writing system, hieroglyphs, emerged near the beginning of dynastic civilization. From very early on, Egypt developed a way to preserve names, rituals, events, and authority in visible form. Writing gave permanence to power and memory, and it became one of the most important tools of Egyptian civilization. Hieroglyphs were used especially on monuments, tombs, temples, and formal inscriptions intended to be seen. Their visual beauty mattered alongside their meaning. A hieroglyphic inscription was not merely text in the modern sense. It was also image, design, and sacred presence carved into stone. Egyptian writing combined signs that could represent sounds, whole words, or categories of meaning. This made the system rich and flexible, but also complex to master. It was not a simple alphabet. It was a layered way of writing that could communicate language while also carrying visual and symbolic force. A more cursive script called hieratic developed for everyday writing on papyrus and other portable surfaces. This practical form allowed administration, letters, accounts, and many ordinary tasks to move more quickly than monumental hieroglyphs would allow. It shows that Egyptian writing had both formal beauty and efficient working forms. Later, another script called demotic became common for faster writing in many practical settings. Over time, as needs changed, the written culture of Egypt adapted. This reminds us again that Egyptian civilization was not frozen in one style. Even its scripts evolved to suit everyday life. The decipherment of hieroglyphs in modern times depended heavily on the Rosetta Stone and the work of scholars such as Champollion. For many centuries, the script had fallen silent to later readers. Its recovery reopened enormous portions of Egyptian history, allowing monuments and text to speak again in far greater detail. Modern understanding of ancient Egypt depends on both texts and archaeology, because neither one alone tells the whole story. Written records reveal names, beliefs, and official claims, while archaeology uncovers houses, tools, food remains, workshops, and patterns of daily life. Together, they give us a fuller picture than either could provide on its own. Ancient Egypt remains one of history's clearest examples of how landscape, religion, administration, art, and ordinary survival can fuse into a civilization of remarkable longevity. The river fed the land, belief shaped power, writing preserved memory, and daily work sustained everything else. When all of those forces are seen together, Egypt becomes not just a series of monuments, but a complete and enduring human world. Grain held such importance in ancient Egypt that it was not only used as food, but also worked almost like a form of currency. Farmers grew large amounts of grain, and the state collected it as tax, stored it in granaries, and redistributed it as payment to workers and officials. This meant that something as simple as wheat or barley became a foundation for both daily survival and the structure of the entire economy. Barley and emmer wheat were the main crops that supported bread making and brewing across Egypt. These grains were processed into flour for bread, which was eaten daily, and also fermented into beer, which was a common drink for all social classes. Together, these two crops formed the core of the Egyptian diet and sustained the population over long periods. Flax was widely grown and used to produce linen, which became one of the most recognizable materials in Egyptian clothing. The plant was processed carefully, and its fibers were spun into thread and woven into fabric. Linen could be made coarse or very fine, depending on skill and purpose, making it suitable for both everyday wear and elite garments. Papyrus grew in the marshy edges of the Nile and became one of Egypt's most versatile natural resources. It could be used to make ropes, baskets, boats, mats, and, most famously, writing material. By cutting and pressing its fibers, Egyptians created sheets that allowed them to record information, communicate, and preserve knowledge. papyrus sheets were made by layering strips from the plant in 2 directions and pressing them together until they bonded into a smooth surface. This process created a flexible and durable writing material that could be rolled into scrolls. It was light, portable, and essential for administration, literature, and communication. Egyptians also wrote on ostraca, which were small pieces of broken pottery or limestone flakes. These materials were easy to find and required no preparation, making them ideal for quick notes, sketches, and practice writing. Many of the most personal and informal texts we have today come from these simple surfaces. Because ostraca were cheap and widely available, they preserve a surprising amount of everyday life. Lists, drafts, jokes, letters, and even drawings have survived on them. They give us a more intimate view of ancient Egypt, beyond the formal inscriptions carved into stone. Egyptian scribes trained by copying texts, practicing symbols, and learning to manage records carefully. Their education was structured and disciplined, often requiring long hours of repetition. This training ensured that important documents were written clearly and accurately, which was essential for the functioning of the state. School exercises show that literacy was a specialized skill and highly valued in society. Being able to read and write opened doors to administrative and government roles. For many young Egyptians, becoming a scribe meant a life of relative comfort compared to manual labor. Some Egyptian texts even praise the scribble profession by comparing it to physically demanding work. They describe how laborers faced heat, exhaustion, and hardship, while scribes worked with ink and papyrus. These comparisons highlight how education could change a person's life in a very practical way. Egyptian numbers were written using separate symbols for ones, tens, hundreds, and larger values, instead of a place value system like modern numbers. This meant that writing large numbers required repeating symbols many times. While different from today's system, it worked effectively for accounting and record keeping. Mathematical papyri show that Egyptians solved practical problems related to measurement, construction, food distribution, and labor organization. Their math was not abstract in the modern sense, but deeply connected to real-life needs. It helped them build structures, divide resources, and manage large projects. Surveyors had to measure land again after the Nile floods because the boundaries could be washed away each year. This made geometry especially important in Egyptian society. Accurate measurement ensured fairness in land ownership and taxation. The Egyptian civil calendar had 365 days divided into 12 months of 30 days, with 5 extra festival days added at the end. This system allowed people to organize time, plan activities, and coordinate religious events. It was simple and practical, even though it did not perfectly match the solar year. Because the calendar did not include a leap day, it slowly drifted relative to the actual solar year over long periods. This meant that festivals and seasonal markers gradually shifted across generations. Despite this, the system remained in use for a very long time. Egyptian timekeeping also involved observing the stars, especially for religious purposes. The night sky was seen as meaningful and ordered, reflecting deeper cosmic patterns. Watching the stars helped Egyptians connect earthly life with the larger universe. The rising of the star Sirius was closely linked to the flooding of the Nile and had strong calendrical importance. Its appearance marked a new cycle and was seen as a sign of renewal. This connection between the sky and the river shows how Egyptians understood nature as an interconnected system. Egyptian civilization maintained a strong continuity in visual style, even though political power and religious ideas changed over time. Art, symbols, and forms remained recognizable across centuries. This consistency helped preserve a sense of identity throughout long periods of change. Old Kingdom Egypt is especially known as the Age of Pyramid Building. During this time, rulers invested immense resources into constructing monumental tombs. These structures reflected both the power of the state and the importance placed on the afterlife. Pyramid construction relied on large, organized labor forces rather than enslaved workers as once believed. Evidence shows that workers were part of structured teams, often rotating in and out of service. This organized system allowed projects to continue steadily over many years. Many pyramid workers were housed, fed, and supported as part of their labor service. Archaeological findings reveal settlements where these workers lived, along with bakeries and storage facilities. This suggests a system of planned labor rather than forced chaos. Worker communities included not only stone haulers and builders, but also bakers, brewers, administrators, and support staff. Building a pyramid required a wide range of skills and roles. It was a coordinated effort involving many parts of society. Massive stone blocks were moved using sledges and coordinated labor, often over carefully prepared surfaces. This process did not rely on unknown or mysterious technology. Instead, it depended on planning, teamwork, and practical engineering. Pyramid temples continued to support rituals for the deceased king long after the monument was completed. Priests performed ceremonies to maintain the king's presence in the afterlife. This shows that the pyramid was part of an ongoing religious system, not just a finished structure. Smaller tombs near pyramid complexes reveal that elites wanted to be buried close to the king. Being near the ruler in death was believed to provide advantages in the afterlife. This created entire landscapes of burial around royal monuments. Tomb decoration often showed idealized scenes of daily life, such as farming, hunting, and family activities. These images were not random decorations. They were meant to provide the deceased with a perfect version of life for eternity. False doors in tombs symbolically allowed offerings to pass between the world of the living and the dead. They were carved to look like real doors, but were not meant to open physically. Instead, they represented a connection between two realms. Mastabas, which were rectangular tombs with sloping sides, were important burial structures before and alongside pyramid building. They show that Egyptian funerary architecture developed gradually. Even after pyramids appeared, mastabas remained in use. During the first intermediate period, central authority weakened and local rulers gained more power. This period shows that Egypt was not always unified or stable. Political fragmentation was part of its long history. The Middle Kingdom began after reunification and is often seen as a time of renewed strength and organization. Leaders restored order and invested in administration and culture. It marked a return to stability after a period of division. Middle Kingdom rulers strengthened government systems and supported building, literature, and regional control. Their efforts helped re-establish a strong central state. This period contributed significantly to Egypt's cultural development. Middle Kingdom literature includes thoughtful works that explore society, leadership, and human uncertainty. These texts show a deeper level of reflection compared to earlier periods. They reveal that Egyptians were not only practical thinkers, but also philosophical ones. Royal burials in the Middle Kingdom were sometimes smaller than earlier pyramids, showing changes in funerary style. Even though beliefs about the afterlife remained important, the expression of those beliefs evolved. This reflects a balance between tradition and adaptation. The Fayum region became important for agricultural development during the Middle Kingdom. Irrigation projects helped expand farming in this area. This shows how Egyptians actively shaped their environment to increase productivity. The Second Intermediate Period brought political fragmentation and the rise of the Hyksos in northern Egypt. This was another time when the country was not fully unified. It highlights the recurring pattern of change and recovery in Egyptian history. The Hyksos were remembered as foreign rulers with connections to Western Asia. Their presence introduced new influences into Egyptian society. Even periods of foreign rule contributed to Egypt's evolving identity. The Hyksos period is associated with the increased use of horses and chariots in Egypt. These technologies later became important in Egyptian military development. It shows how outside influence could bring new tools and strategies. The New Kingdom began when rulers expelled the Hyksos and reunited Egypt. This marked a return to strong, centralized power. It also opened a new phase of expansion and international activity. New Kingdom Egypt became more outward-looking and built an empire beyond its traditional borders. It extended influence into Nubia and the Levant. This period represents one of Egypt's most powerful and expansive phases. The New Kingdom produced many famous rulers whose names are still widely recognized today. These kings and queens shaped Egypt's political and cultural legacy. Their monuments and records continue to define how we imagine ancient Egypt. Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh in her own right, which was rare in Egyptian history. She adopted the full symbols of kingship to present herself as a legitimate ruler. Her reign shows that leadership roles could sometimes extend beyond expected boundaries. Reliefs from Hatshepsut's time depict an expedition to Punt, showing Egypt's long-distance trade connections. These images provide valuable evidence of interaction with distant lands. They reveal a network of exchange beyond the Nile Valley. Thutmose III is remembered as a powerful military leader who expanded Egypt's influence. His campaigns strengthened Egypt's position in surrounding regions. He is often seen as one of Egypt's most effective rulers. Amenhotep III presided over a period of wealth and artistic richness. His reign saw extensive building and cultural expression. It represents a time of prosperity and confidence in Egyptian society. Art from the Amarna period appears more fluid and less rigid than earlier styles. Figures are shown with softer lines and different proportions. This change reflects broader shifts in religious and cultural ideas during that time. Amarna also provides evidence of industries such as glassmaking, faience production, and craftwork. These discoveries show that Egyptian society included skilled artisans and complex production systems. Daily life involved both creativity and technical expertise. After the New Kingdom, Egypt experienced periods of divided rule and foreign control. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, and later Greeks and Romans all influenced the region. Despite these changes, Egyptian traditions continued to persist. Even under foreign rulers, Egyptian religious practices and artistic styles remained strong. New leaders often adopted local customs to gain legitimacy. This continuity shows how deeply rooted Egyptian culture was. Ra was one of the great solar gods of ancient Egypt, closely connected with the sun's daily journey across the sky. To the Egyptians, the rising sun was not just a natural event. It was part of a repeating cosmic process that represented light, order, and renewal, returning each day after darkness. Amun rose to exceptional prominence when Thebes became politically powerful, and in many cases he was worshipped as Amun-Ra. This merging of identities shows how Egyptian religion could adapt as political centers changed. A god who was once more local could become central to the whole kingdom when his city gained influence. Osiris became one of the most important gods connected with death, rebirth, and the hope of life beyond the grave. He was not only associated with the dead, but also with renewal itself. That made him especially meaningful in a civilization that watched the Nile flood, retreat, and bring life again year after year. Isis was revered as a powerful goddess connected with protection, motherhood, and magic. She became one of the most beloved figures in Egyptian religion because she represented care, skill, and sacred strength at the same time. Her role shows that divine power in Egypt was not always expressed through force alone. but often through healing, devotion, and protection. Horus was linked with kingship and the sky, and living kings were often identified with him. This gave royal rule a divine dimension, as though the ruler stood within a larger sacred pattern rather than outside it. Horus helped connect the human office of kingship with cosmic meaning. Anubis was strongly associated with embalming and the careful treatment of the dead. In a culture that placed great importance on preserving the body, this made him a deeply significant figure. His presence in funerary belief reflects how seriously Egyptians approached death, ritual, and preparation for the afterlife. Thoth was connected with writing, wisdom, and knowledge, and could appear as an ibis-headed figure or as a baboon. He represents the Egyptian respect for thought, record-keeping, calculation, and sacred speech. In many ways, Thoth belongs to the quiet but essential world of memory, learning, and ordered understanding. Hathor had many roles, including ties to love, music, motherhood, celebration, and the sky. Her wide range of associations shows how Egyptian gods could hold many meanings at once. Rather than being limited to one narrow function, she could represent joy, care, beauty, and divine welcome together. Power was especially important at Memphis and was associated with craftsmanship and creation. This connection is meaningful because it links making things by hand with sacred creative power. In Egyptian thought, skilled work was not merely practical. It could also be understood as part of the deeper order of existence. Sobek, the crocodile-linked god, reflects the Egyptian tendency to recognize sacred force in dangerous parts of nature. Crocodiles were powerful, feared animals of the Nile, so worship connected awe with caution. Instead of separating beauty from danger, Egyptian religion often made room for both in the same divine form. Bastet was associated with cats, protection, and the domestic world, while also carrying sacred importance. Her role reminds us that religion in Egypt was not confined to grand temples alone. It also touched the quieter spaces of home, safety, and everyday life. Sekhmet, often shown with the head of a lioness, embodied destructive force, but was also linked with healing. This balance may seem surprising at first, yet it fits Egyptian thought very well. A power that can destroy can also defend, purify, or restore when approached in the right way. Egyptian gods could merge into combined forms, showing that theology in Egypt was flexible rather than rigid. This meant divine identities were not always sharply separated. A god could join with another in a way that expressed overlapping powers, shared meanings, or changing religious emphasis. Local cults mattered greatly in Egypt, so one city's chief deity could be very different from another's. Religion was not experienced in exactly the same way everywhere across the land. This gave Egyptian worship both unity and regional diversity, allowing local identity to remain important inside a larger sacred world. Temples housed divine images and were treated as earthly residences of the gods. They were not simply public gathering halls or symbolic monuments. In Egyptian belief, the temple was a place where divine presence could be cared for through ordered ritual. Priests performed daily rituals such as washing, clothing, and presenting offerings to the god's statue. These actions may sound almost domestic, but they were considered sacred duties. The regularity of these rituals helped maintain the bond between the divine realm and the human world. Ordinary people did not usually enter the innermost sacred spaces of major temples. The most restricted areas were reserved for priests and ritual specialists. This created a layered sacred environment, where access became narrower and more controlled as one moved deeper inside. Festival processions could bring divine images out into more public view, allowing the gods to move beyond the temple sanctuary. These events connected formal temple worship with the wider population. In that sense, Processions gave people rare and meaningful contact with a god otherwise hidden in sacred interior space. Karnak became one of the largest temple complexes in Egypt and expanded across many reigns. It was not created all at once, but grew over generations as rulers added buildings, halls, and monuments. This makes Karnak feel almost like a stone record of accumulated devotion and royal ambition. Luxor Temple was closely tied to royal ideology and major religious festivals at Thebes. It was more than a beautiful building. It played a role in expressing kingship, sacred renewal, and the ceremonial life of one of Egypt's most important religious centers. Egyptian temple pylons, courts, hypostyle halls, and sanctuaries created a gradual movement from open exterior spaces into darker, holier interior zones. The building itself taught the visitor something through space and light. As one moved inward, the experience became more enclosed, more symbolic, and more sacred. Temple walls often showed the king making offerings or defeating enemies, linking ritual order with political strength. These scenes were not simple decoration. They communicated the idea that proper worship and royal power worked together to protect the world from disorder. Obelisks were monumental stone shafts that could mark temple entrances and bear royal inscriptions. Their form made them highly visible, especially in open temple settings. They stood as both artistic achievements and lasting statements of sacred kingship. Egyptian religion did not draw a sharp line between magic and medicine, because spoken formulas and practical treatments could be used together. To Egyptians, words, ritual, and physical remedies could all be meaningful parts of care. This reminds us that ancient systems of healing often worked through a broader understanding of cause and effect than modern medicine does. Protective amulets were common in both life and death, showing how religion functioned at an everyday level. People wore or placed small sacred objects near the body because they believed protection could be carried, invoked, and maintained. These objects make religion feel very close, personal, and practical. The scarab beetle became an important symbol of renewal and transformation. Because scarabs were seen pushing balls across the ground, Egyptians connected them with motion, becoming, and the sun's renewing cycle. A small insect was thus turned into a powerful sign of cosmic rebirth. The Eye of Horus was widely used as a symbol of protection and restoration. It carried meanings tied to healing, wholeness, and recovered balance. Its popularity shows how certain images could move between myth, ritual, and daily use with remarkable ease. Household religion included small shrines, personal devotion, and protective figures outside official state cults. This means that religion in Egypt was not only the domain of kings, priests, and temple institutions. It also lived in ordinary rooms, family concerns, and the quiet hopes of everyday people. Dreams could be treated as meaningful signs, and Egyptians even preserved dream interpretations in writing. This suggests that sleep was not viewed as empty time, but as a possible source of messages or insight. The inner world of dreams could therefore become part of the larger sacred order. Egyptians placed enormous importance on the afterlife and invested great effort in preparing for it. Death was not seen simply as an ending. It was a transition that required planning, ritual care, and the right spiritual equipment to continue safely beyond this life. One idea of the afterlife imagined a beautiful and fertile landscape where the dead could live in abundance. This vision feels deeply Egyptian because it mirrors the life-giving richness of the Nile world. Even eternity was imagined in terms of cultivated fields, order, and provision, rather than empty abstraction. The soul was understood through multiple elements, including what modern scholars call the Ki A and the Ba. This means Egyptian ideas about personhood were layered and complex. A human being was not reduced to only body or only spirit, but understood through several connected aspects. The Ca was often seen as a vital life force that continued after death and required offerings. This helps explain why tomb ritual and food presentation mattered so much. Offerings were not simply symbolic gifts. They were tied to the continued support of the person beyond death. The Ba was often pictured as a human-headed bird able to move between worlds. This image expresses mobility, personality, and continued identity after death. It suggests that some part of the self could travel, return, and remain active beyond the limits of the buried body. Preserving the body mattered because continued identity in the afterlife was tied to bodily integrity and ritual memory. The dead needed to remain recognizable, protected, and properly treated. This belief gives much deeper meaning to Egyptian burial customs, which were never only about display. Mummification developed over time and became increasingly elaborate, especially for elites. It was not one unchanging process used in exactly the same way forever. Like many Egyptian traditions, it evolved through experience, belief, and differences in status. During embalming, internal organs were often removed and treated separately, while the heart usually remained in the body. The heart had special significance because it was tied to identity, thought, and moral judgment. This reveals how Egyptian anatomy and belief were closely connected. In some mummification procedures, the brain could be removed through the nose. This detail often surprises modern people, yet it shows how technically involved embalming could become. Egyptian embalmers developed careful methods for preserving the body according to their funerary beliefs. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, was central to drying the body during mummification. It helped remove moisture, which slowed decay and aided preservation. This is one of the clearest examples of how Egyptian ritual depended on practical material knowledge as well as sacred intention. Linen wrappings were applied in many layers, often together with resins and protective amulets. The wrapping process was not just mechanical. It was a careful transformation of the body into a protected, ritualized form prepared for eternity. Canopic containers protected certain internal organs and were associated with the 4 sons of Horus. These containers show how afterlife preparation extended beyond the body itself. Different parts of the person had to be guarded and ritually managed with care. Funeral rituals included the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was intended to restore the deceased's senses in the afterlife. The ritual symbolically allowed the dead to breathe, speak, see, and receive offerings again. In this way, burial rites aimed not merely to preserve, but to reactivate life in a new state. Coffins were often decorated with texts and images meant to protect and guide the dead. A coffin was more than a container. It was also a sacred surface filled with words, signs, and images designed to support safe passage into the next world. Pyramid texts are among the earliest large collections of funerary spells created for royal burials. These texts show that written language was used not only to record earthly affairs, but also to shape the destiny of the dead. Words themselves were treated as powerful tools of protection and transformation. Coffin texts later extended many funerary ideas beyond kings to a wider elite. This shift shows that afterlife knowledge was not fixed forever as an exclusively royal privilege. Over time, sacred access could broaden and take new written forms. The Book of the Dead was not one single fixed book, but a collection of spells that could be selected and combined. Different individuals could be buried with different groups of texts, depending on means and choice. This makes it less like one uniform scripture and more like a flexible guide for the journey after death. One of the most famous afterlife scenes shows the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at. This image expresses a moral idea in a form that is easy to understand. A person's inner truth is measured against the principle of order and justice. In that judgment scene, Thoth records the result while the monster Amit waits nearby to consume the heart of the unworthy. The scene is calm in composition, yet full of quiet tension. It reflects an afterlife that was hopeful but not automatic, because moral balance still mattered. Tomb robbery was feared because it threatened both valuable goods and the eternal security of the dead. To steal from a tomb was not only a crime against property, it was also an attack on memory, ritual protection, and the carefully prepared future of the deceased. Tomb robbery still occurred in antiquity, even though strong religious taboos surrounded burial places. This shows that sacred fear and economic temptation could exist side by side. It also reminds us that ancient societies, like modern ones, lived with the tension between belief and human greed. Shabti figures were placed in burials to work for the deceased in the afterlife if called upon. These small figures acted as stand-ins for labor, allowing the dead to avoid work and remain provided for. It is a gentle example of how Egyptians imagined eternity, not as an abstract cloud-like state, but as a world with tasks, order, and practical needs. Burial assemblages in ancient Egypt could include jewelry, furniture, food, clothing, cosmetics, and writing equipment. This shows that the tomb was prepared almost like a complete household for the next life. Egyptians did not imagine the afterlife as empty or abstract. They expected the dead to need familiar objects, comfort, beauty, and practical tools. So many burials were stocked with the kinds of things that supported daily existence on Earth. Daily Egyptian dress relied heavily on linen because flax grew well in the Nile environment. Linen was light, breathable, and well-suited to Egypt's warm climate, which made it both practical and comfortable. Over time, linen became one of the most recognizable materials in Egyptian life. It was worn by workers, priests, elites, and the dead, showing how one plant could connect agriculture, clothing, ritual, and burial all at once. Many Egyptian garments look simple in shape, but elite clothing could involve very fine weaving, careful pleating, and polished finishing. At first glance, the clean lines of Egyptian dress can seem plain, yet closer study reveals impressive skill. Fine linen could be made extremely delicate, almost airy in appearance. This means Egyptian clothing was not only functional, it could also express wealth, refinement, and the quiet beauty of precision craftsmanship. White linen became especially characteristic in Egyptian art, even though real clothing could also be dyed or decorated in some cases. The repeated use of white in images may reflect both the natural look of linen and broader associations with cleanliness and order. In visual terms, white garments also helped figures appear calm and clear. So even a simple artistic choice could reinforce deeper Egyptian values of purity, balance, and careful presentation. Men commonly wore kilt-like garments, while women were often shown in sheath dresses, although clothing styles changed across time. This tells us that Egyptian dress had patterns and conventions, but it was not frozen forever. Different periods introduced changes in cut, layering, and detail. Clothing therefore gives us a helpful reminder that Egyptian civilization lasted so long that fashion itself had time to evolve, even within a culture known for continuity. Children are often shown with little clothing in Egyptian art, especially in warm weather settings. That detail reflects both climate and artistic convention. In a hot environment, minimal dress for young children would have been practical. At the same time, the way children were represented in art also helped distinguish age and stage of life. Even small visual choices in Egyptian images often carried social meaning. Wigs were common among elites and could serve both hygiene and fashion. Shaved or closely managed hair may have helped with heat and cleanliness, while wigs allowed people to present themselves in polished and elegant ways. Some wigs were quite elaborate, showing careful styling and status. This means hair presentation in Egypt was not a trivial matter. It sat at the meeting point of comfort, beauty, and social identity. Cosmetics were used by both men and women in ancient Egypt, not only for beauty, but also for personal care and status. This is important because modern assumptions can make cosmetics seem gendered in a narrow way, but Egyptian use was broader. Eye paint, oils, and skin treatments could be part of grooming, ritual preparation, and health. Appearance in Egypt was often tied to dignity, order, and well-being, rather than mere decoration. Dark eye paint could reduce glare and may also have offered practical benefits alongside its visual appeal. In the bright Egyptian light, especially near sand and river, reducing reflected brightness would have mattered. At the same time, lined eyes became one of the most recognizable features of Egyptian appearance in art. This makes cosmetics a good example of how something could be useful, beautiful, and culturally meaningful all at once. Perfumed oils and scented cones appear in Egyptian art, showing the importance of smell in social and ritual life. Fragrance was not treated as a minor luxury. It was part of refinement, hospitality, celebration, and bodily presentation. In a world of ritual care and sensory symbolism, scent helped shape atmosphere. It could make a banquet feel richer, a body more polished, and a sacred setting more complete. Jewelry was highly developed in Egypt, using gold, faience, semi-precious stones, and glass for beauty and protection. Egyptian jewelry was not merely ornamental in the modern sense. Many pieces also carried symbolic or magical force, linking adornment with safety and sacred meaning. Necklaces, rings, amulets, and bracelets could therefore express wealth, skill, identity, and spiritual protection at the same time. Gold was especially valued because it did not tarnish easily and was associated with divine or solar permanence. Its lasting shine made it feel suitable for gods, kings, and eternal objects. In a culture deeply concerned with preservation and continuity, a metal that seemed resistant to decay carried special meaning. Gold was not only precious because it was rare. It was precious because it looked enduring. Faience, a bright glazed material that is not made from ordinary clay, became one of the most distinctive Egyptian manufactured substances. Its smooth surface and vivid color gave objects a luminous quality. Egyptians used it for beads, amulets, vessels, and decorative items. Faience shows how strongly Egyptian artisans valued color, finish, and symbolic material effects, even in relatively small objects. Egyptian blue is one of the earliest known synthetic pigments and was produced through controlled high-temperature processes. That makes it an important technological achievement as well as an artistic one. Creating a stable and beautiful blue required knowledge, experimentation, and careful handling of materials. This reminds us that ancient art often depended on surprisingly advanced technical skill behind the scenes. Egyptian artisans worked in stone, wood, ivory, metal, glass, and textiles with remarkable specialization. Their world was not built only by general labor. It also depended on trained experts who knew how to shape different materials for different purposes. A carved statue, a woven cloth, a decorated coffin, and a metal ornament all required separate kinds of mastery. Egyptian society was therefore supported by a broad and highly skilled craft tradition. Many Egyptian furniture forms, including stools, beds, and boxes, were both practical and elegant. Furniture was designed for use, but it also reflected taste, status, and craftsmanship. Even ordinary forms could be shaped with refined proportions and decorative detail. This tells us that the Egyptian sense of order extended into household design, where usefulness and visual harmony were often combined. The hot climate encouraged architecture with thick walls, courtyards, shade, and ventilation wherever possible. Egyptian builders understood their environment and responded to it in practical ways. Buildings were shaped not only by style or symbolism, but also by a need to stay cooler and more comfortable. This makes domestic architecture a good example of how Egyptian life was guided by close attention to local conditions. Mud brick was the standard building material for houses because it was abundant, practical, and well suited to the environment. Unlike stone, it was easier to produce in large quantities and useful for ordinary construction. Many people today imagine Egypt mainly in carved stone, but most daily life unfolded among mud brick walls. The ordinary texture of Egyptian civilization was therefore far less monumental than its temples and tombs suggest. Stone was used more often for temples, tombs, and monuments intended to endure for long periods. This material choice reflects a clear difference in priority. Ordinary dwellings served the living and could be rebuilt, but sacred and funerary structures were meant to last. Stone therefore became associated with permanence, memory, and ritual significance in a way that mud brick usually was not. Egyptian houses could include storage areas, grinding spaces, ovens, and access to the roof. These details show that homes were active working environments, not just places for sleeping. Food preparation, storage, and domestic labor all shaped the design of living spaces. Roof areas may also have provided extra working or resting space. The house was a practical center of daily routine. Wealthier homes might contain reception rooms, columns, gardens, and more specialized spaces. This reveals social difference very clearly. While many homes focused on basic function, elite households could also support display, hospitality, and comfort on a larger scale. Domestic architecture therefore reflects economic rank, but also the value Egyptians placed on ordered and cultivated living environments. Garden imagery in tombs suggests that trees, pools, flowers, and shaded cultivated areas were highly valued in elite life. In a hot environment bordered by desert, gardens offered beauty, coolness, and controlled abundance. Their repeated appearance in art shows that they represented more than decoration. They expressed peace, fertility, and the pleasure of ordered nature brought close to home. Bread came in many forms and was the central food for much of the population. It was a staple in the deepest sense, dependable, daily, and widely shared across society. Different shapes and methods of preparation existed, and bread appeared in both ordinary meals and ritual offerings. This makes it one of the clearest examples of how a simple food could hold economic, social, and religious importance all at once. Beer was a standard Egyptian drink, and not merely a rare luxury. It was part of normal consumption for many people, and often safer or more practical to drink than untreated water in some settings. Egyptian beer was deeply woven into diet, labor, and ration systems. It was common enough that it belonged not just to feasts, but to routine life. Egyptian beer was nutritionally important and in some ways closer to a thick fermented grain drink than many modern beers. It likely contained more suspended material and functioned partly as food as well as drink. This matters because it helps modern readers understand that ancient beer should not be imagined simply as a familiar modern beverage. In Egypt, it was part of the dietary foundation of everyday life. Onions, garlic, lentils, beans, figs, dates, and grapes all formed part of Egyptian food culture. This reveals a more varied diet than the simple phrase bread and beer might suggest. Egyptian cuisine drew on field crops, orchard produce, and plant foods that could be eaten fresh, dried, or prepared in different ways. The result was a food system shaped by agriculture, storage, and seasonal abundance. Fish from the Nile were important food sources, and fishing scenes appear often in tomb decoration. The river did not only water crops and move boats, it also provided protein through its rich aquatic life. Fish, therefore, belonged both to the practical economy of nourishment and to the visual world of tomb art. where scenes of fishing could symbolize provision and the fullness of life. Cattle, sheep, and goats were raised in Egypt, although meat was more common in elite and ritual settings than as an everyday staple for everyone. This suggests a difference between what was possible and what was routine. Livestock mattered economically and symbolically, but regular meat consumption was not equal across society. Animal husbandry supported agriculture, offerings, and prestige as much as ordinary diet. Geese and ducks were valued both as food and as recognizable motifs in Egyptian art. Marsh environments made bird life especially important, and waterfowl became part of both the table and the artistic imagination. Their presence in tomb scenes reflects the richness of the Nile ecosystem. It also shows how closely Egyptians observed the creatures around them. Bread and beer were so central that funerary offering formulas repeatedly mention them. That repeated pairing tells us something very simple and very deep. What mattered most in daily sustenance also mattered most in ritual continuity. To provide bread and beer to the dead was to provide the most basic foundations of ongoing life. Food offerings in temples and tombs linked economy, religion, and memory into one system. The food presented to gods and the dead had practical value, symbolic meaning, and social function all at once. Offerings could express devotion, sustain ritual institutions, and preserve relationships across the boundary of death. In Egypt, food was never only material. It was also sacred and relational. Egyptian workers on state projects often received rations rather than wages in coined money. Grain, beer, and other provisions functioned as payment in a society where coinage was not the normal basis of exchange for most of pharaonic history. This means labor was tied directly to the movement of stored goods. Work, food, and administration were closely connected. There was no coin-based economy in most of pharaonic Egypt, so exchange was structured through measured goods and labor obligations. This can sound unfamiliar to modern people, but it worked effectively within the systems Egyptians had built. Value could be tracked through amounts of grain, deliveries, rations, and service, rather than through coins in the pocket. Granaries were crucial institutions because stored grain supported taxation, payment, and resilience in hard times. A granary was not just a warehouse. It was a pillar of state power and social stability. Grain storage helped Egypt survive fluctuations, organize labor, and manage its agricultural wealth in a controlled way. Storage jars and ceilings give archaeologists important evidence about administration and the movement of goods. These objects can reveal what was stored, who controlled it, and how distribution was managed. Even a broken seal or marked jar can tell a story about bureaucracy, supervision, and the careful tracking of resources. Egyptian officials recorded livestock, harvests, and deliveries with great care, showing the documentary depth of the state. Administration depended on knowledge, and knowledge depended on records. This habit of writing things down helped support taxation, labor organization, temple economy, and long-distance control. Quiet paperwork stood behind many of Egypt's greatest achievements. Trade brought Egypt cedar from Lebanon, incense from Punt, gold from Nubia, and other valuable materials from abroad. This means Egypt was never fully isolated within its river valley. It was connected to wider regional networks that supplied wood, luxury goods, sacred materials, and metals that were not equally available at home. Egypt's wealth was partly based on its ability to gather resources from both river agriculture and long-distance exchange. This combination made it unusually strong. The Nile provided steady internal support, while trade expanded access to special materials and prestige goods. Egypt's prosperity therefore rested on both local abundance and outward connection. Nubia was deeply connected to Egypt through the Nile and through long histories of trade, conflict, and cultural exchange. the relationship was not one-dimensional. It changed across time and included cooperation, rivalry, movement of goods, and movement of ideas. Nubia was not merely a distant borderland. It was one of Egypt's most important neighbors. Egyptian control of Nubia mattered greatly because Nubia offered access to gold and important strategic routes. Economic interest and political expansion were closely linked there. Control of southern regions strengthened the Egyptian state materially and militarily. This shows how geography, wealth, and imperial ambition could reinforce one another. Fortresses in frontier regions show that Egyptian states invested heavily in border management and military logistics. These were not symbolic outposts placed at random. They helped control movement, protect routes, and project power into contested areas. They remind us that Egyptian strength depended not only on temples and tombs, but also on organized defense. The Egyptian army changed over time, becoming more professional and outward-looking in the new kingdom. Earlier, Egypt was not always shaped by imperial warfare, but later expansion required more organized military systems. This shift reflects broader political changes as Egypt moved from a primarily river kingdom into a regional power. Chariots became important elite military technology in the new kingdom. They changed how war could be fought, especially in open terrain and in combination with archery. Chariots were also prestigious, linking military skill with status. Their arrival shows how technology and power could reshape elite identity, as well as battlefield tactics. Archery was a major strength of Egyptian warfare, especially from chariots. A moving archer could strike from a distance, while remaining harder to reach in close combat. This made training, coordination, and mobility especially important. Egyptian military success depended not only on bravery, but also on practiced technique and effective equipment. Military campaigns were also chances to collect tribute, prisoners, raw materials, and prestige. War in the ancient world was often tied to economics and image, as much as to direct defense. Successful campaigns strengthened rulers by bringing in wealth and by proving their power publicly. Inscriptions then helped turn that success into lasting memory. Victory scenes on temple walls often presented warfare in strongly stylized royal terms, rather than as neutral battle reporting. The goal was not simply to describe events exactly as they happened. It was to show the king as strong, victorious, and divinely supported. These images therefore tell us both about war and about the way power wanted to be seen. Egyptian medicine combined practical observation, recipes, surgery, and ritual language. Healing was not divided into neat modern categories. What mattered was whether a treatment could protect, restore, or relieve. This made Egyptian medicine broad in method, mixing hands-on care with words, substances, and sacred understanding. Medical papyri show attention to symptoms, diagnosis, and prognosis, not only magical appeal. This is important because it reveals careful observation at work. Egyptian healers often tried to identify what was happening, judge whether it could be treated, and choose a response accordingly. Their medical tradition included real, practical reasoning. Some Egyptian healers specialized, and priests of certain deities could also act as medical practitioners. This overlap between religion and healing reflects the wider Egyptian tendency not to separate sacred and practical life too sharply. A healer could work with remedies and also with ritual authority, depending on the case and context. Evidence from texts and archaeology suggests that women could practice medicine in ancient Egypt. This tells us that medical knowledge was not exclusively male. Women's participation in healing fits with broader evidence that Egyptian women held more legal and economic capacity than in many later societies. Dentistry and concern for teeth are attested in Egyptian sources, though a gritty diet could wear teeth down heavily. Bread made with ground grain often contained small mineral particles from milling, which gradually damaged teeth over time. This is a quiet but vivid reminder that even staple foods could shape health in long-term ways. Ancient Egyptian treatments used ingredients such as honey, fats, minerals, and plant materials. Remedies were often practical mixtures prepared for wounds, pain, or illness. This kind of medicine depended on close familiarity with available materials and their effects. Even when the theory behind illness differed from modern views, the treatments themselves could still involve careful experimentation. Honey was especially valued in Egyptian medicine because it could be used in dressings and had preservative qualities. In simple terms, it was useful not only because it tasted good, but because it could help protect wounds and support healing. This makes honey a good example of how Egyptians turned familiar natural substances into practical medical tools. Surgical treatment existed in some form in ancient Egypt, especially for wounds and fractures. Egyptian healers did not only rely on prayers or magical language. In some cases, they examined injuries, set broken bones, treated cuts, and worked in direct physical ways that show real hands-on medical knowledge. Mummification itself gave Egyptians detailed familiarity with the human body, even though their medical theories were not the same as modern biology. Repeated experience with embalming meant they understood a great deal about bodily structure. This did not make them modern anatomists, but it did give them close practical contact with the body's internal parts. Illness, in Egyptian thought, could be explained through both natural and supernatural causes without contradiction. A sickness might be treated with herbs, bandages, and observation, while also being connected to divine anger, harmful forces, or unseen influence. To Egyptian healers, these approaches did not compete. They could exist together as part of one wider understanding of health. Childbirth and fertility had strong religious associations and were surrounded by protective rituals. Bringing a child into the world was a physical process, but also one filled with uncertainty and hope. Because of that, Egyptians used amulets, prayers, and sacred symbols to seek safety and support during pregnancy and birth. Household medicine probably handled many ordinary health problems before a specialist was ever consulted. Families likely relied on practical remedies, inherited knowledge, and common treatments for everyday injuries or illness. This reminds us that much of ancient healthcare began not in temples or formal settings, but inside ordinary homes. Egyptian women had more legal and economic rights than women in many later Mediterranean societies. This is one of the more striking features of Egyptian civilization. Women could act in ways that gave them a clearer legal presence, which suggests that Egyptian social structure, while still unequal in many ways, allowed women a stronger formal position than many people might expect. Women could own, inherit, and transfer property in ancient Egypt. That means they were not simply dependent on male relatives for all economic standing. Property rights gave women a real place in family wealth, legal agreements, and long-term security, making their position in society more substantial than in many other ancient cultures. Marriage in Egypt was generally treated more as a social and household arrangement than as one single, elaborate, state-controlled religious ceremony in the modern sense. What mattered most was the formation of a working domestic unit. Marriage was tied to home life, property, and shared responsibilities rather than being defined only by a formal public ritual. Divorce was possible in ancient Egypt, and legal arrangements could help protect property interests when a marriage ended. This shows that Egyptian society recognized marriage as something that could be dissolved, not simply an unbreakable bond under all conditions. Practical issues such as possessions and obligations still had to be managed carefully. Elite women could hold major influence, especially inside royal families and temple institutions. Their power did not always look the same as formal kingship, but it could still shape politics, succession, and religious prestige. In some settings, women stood close enough to the center of authority to affect the direction of the state. The title, Mistress of the House, reflected the central economic role women played in managing domestic life. A household was not a small or simple unit. It involved storage, food, textiles, labor, and family order, so the woman who managed it held real practical importance. This title points to everyday authority, not just symbolic respect. Some women served in temple roles, and the title Divine Adoratrix later became politically important in Thebes. This shows that women could take part in religious systems in meaningful ways. In some cases, sacred office also carried political weight, especially when tied to major temple centers. Queenship in Egypt could carry ideological power through ties to kingship, divine birth, and dynastic legitimacy. A queen was not merely a background figure beside a ruler. In many cases, royal women helped shape how power was presented and justified, especially when lineage and sacred symbolism were involved. Hatshepsut's reign shows that female rule could be presented using the full visual language of kingship. She did not rule by inventing a completely separate model of authority. Instead, she entered the established system and used its symbols, images, and public forms to claim legitimate power. Royal women such as Ti and Nefertiti appear very prominently in art and diplomacy, showing a visibility not always common in other ancient courts. Their presence in imagery and public representation suggests they held more than ceremonial importance. They helped shape royal image, political meaning, and sometimes even international perception. Deir el-Medina was the workers' village connected with the people who cut and decorated royal tombs on the Theban West Bank. This settlement is especially important because it brings us close to the lives of skilled laborers rather than only kings and priests. It is one of the clearest windows into the working world behind some of Egypt's greatest monuments. Deir el-Medina is exceptionally valuable because it preserves evidence of ordinary literate life, including notes, complaints, and accounts. Instead of only grand royal inscriptions, we find traces of daily concerns and personal voices. This makes the village feel human in a very immediate way, full of work, frustration, routine, and private thought. The workers at Deir el-Medina were highly skilled artisans rather than anonymous laborers. They were specialists trusted with the cutting and decoration of royal tombs, which required precision, training, and artistic ability. Their status reminds us that Egypt's monumental beauty depended on expert hands, not faceless masses. The village provides evidence for work schedules, ration systems, family life, illness, and personal disputes. In other words, it preserves not only labor history, but the texture of ordinary existence. Through Deir el-Medina, we see how work and home were connected in a community shaped by both state service and private life. Records from Deir el-Medina include some of the earliest well-documented labor strikes in history, connected to delayed rations. This is remarkable because it shows workers organizing and voicing complaint in response to practical hardship. Even in a highly ordered civilization, people still pushed back when the systems supporting them broke down. Ostraca from the village preserves sketches, jokes, letters, and practice drawings, in addition to official texts. These small scraps bring ancient people very close to us. They reveal humor, training, creativity, and informal communication, reminding us that ordinary life leaves behind traces just as important as formal monuments. Deir el-Medina also shows that tomb workers sometimes became involved in the illicit reuse or theft of funerary materials. This complicated detail reveals a world that was not morally simple or perfectly controlled. People who built sacred spaces could also be tempted by the valuables inside them, especially in times of hardship or disorder. Archaeology at Deir el-Medina has been especially important for studying ancient health and daily experience. Because the site preserves homes, texts, and material remains so well, it allows scholars to reconstruct how people lived, worked, suffered, and adapted. It is one of the richest sites for understanding real human lives in ancient Egypt. Egyptian art followed conventions of representation rather than trying to capture a single moment exactly as the eye sees it. The goal was not photographic realism. Instead, artists aimed to show what was most complete, important, or meaningful about a person or scene. Heads and legs are often shown in profile while shoulders face forward, creating a composite view. This arrangement may look unusual to modern viewers, but it was a deliberate system. It allowed the artist to show each body part from what Egyptians considered its clearest and most recognizable angle. Scale in Egyptian art usually reflected status, so more important figures appear larger than attendants, servants, or enemies. This means size was not simply about physical realism. It communicated rank, significance, and social meaning in a way that could be understood immediately. Artistic grids helped maintain proportion and consistency in figure drawing. By using measured guides, artists could reproduce standard body forms in a controlled and recognizable way. This system helped Egyptian art remain visually stable over very long periods. Preliminary sketches and corrections sometimes survive on unfinished works, revealing the working methods of Egyptian artists. These traces are especially valuable because they show process rather than polished finish. They remind us that Egyptian art, for all its calm certainty, was made through planning, adjustment, and human effort. Tomb paintings used mineral pigments and could preserve vivid color for thousands of years in Egypt's dry conditions. The brightness we still see today is not only due to artistic taste, but also to climate and material choice. Color in Egypt was carefully made, symbolically meaningful, and often surprisingly durable. Relief carving could be either raised or sunk depending on artistic and architectural needs. Each method created a different visual effect under changing light. This shows that Egyptian artists were attentive not only to images themselves, but also to how those images would appear on temple and tomb walls. Statues were not only commemorative artworks, they could also serve as ritual bodies for the dead or for divine presence. This means sculpture in Egypt often had a living, sacred role. A statue could act as a place where power, memory, or presence continued to reside. Egyptian portraiture often balanced idealization with selective individuality rather than aiming for exact realism in the modern sense. A face might look calm, orderly, and dignified while still preserving specific features. This balance allowed portraits to express both the person and the ideal they were meant to embody. Mummy portraits from Roman Egypt show a later blending of Egyptian funerary practice with Greco-Roman painting styles. These works are especially striking because they join one culture's burial traditions with another culture's portrait techniques. They reveal how Egyptian customs could continue while also absorbing new influences. Egyptian artisans were experts in stone, from enormous statues to tiny carved amulets. Working stone at such different scales required both strength and delicacy. This range of skill helps explain how Egypt could produce both colossal monuments and intricate personal objects with equal confidence. Wood was less abundant in Egypt than mud brick or stone, so good timber often had to be imported. This scarcity made wood more valuable and encouraged careful use. Egyptian material culture was therefore shaped not only by what was admired, but also by what was locally available or difficult to obtain. Because imported wood was valuable, Egyptian carpenters developed skillful joinery and economical use of timber. They had to make the most of what they had. This pressure encouraged precision and efficiency, turning limitation into craftsmanship. Glass production in Egypt was already significant by the New Kingdom and could produce richly colored luxury items. This tells us that Egyptians were not only master stone builders, they also worked with heat, chemistry, and delicate materials in highly controlled ways. Faience and glass workshops at places such as Amarna help scholars understand Egyptian experimentation with heat-based technologies. These workshops show that ancient craft was also a kind of technical knowledge. Trial, control, and material understanding all played a role in the creation of brilliant finished objects. Metalworking in Egypt included copper, bronze, gold, electrum, and later greater use of iron in later eras. Different metals served different needs, from tools to ornaments to ritual objects. This variety shows the wide technical range of Egyptian crafts and the importance of metallurgy across daily and elite life. Egyptian cosmetic containers, mirrors, combs, and jewelry show that personal grooming supported major craft industries. Care of the body involved many specialized objects, each requiring design and production. This means that beauty, hygiene, and status helped sustain a broader economic world of artisans and workshops. Music was woven into Egyptian religion and entertainment, with instruments such as harps, flutes, lutes, and sistra. It belonged to ceremonies, celebrations, and elite gatherings. This suggests that sound was an important part of how Egyptians shaped emotion, ritual atmosphere, and social life. The sistrum, a shaking instrument, became especially associated with Hathor and temple ritual. Its sound was not just musical, but sacred. The use of a distinctive instrument in worship shows how Egyptian religion involved movement, rhythm, and sensory experience, as well as words and images. Banquets in elite art often show musicians, dancers, perfume, flowers, and elaborate hospitality. These scenes present wealth and pleasure, but also a carefully ordered social world. Feasting in Egyptian art is rarely chaotic. It appears graceful, abundant, and full of cultivated sensory detail. Board games were part of Egyptian leisure, and Senet is the most famous example that survives. The existence of such games reminds us that Egyptians made space for recreation as well as labor and ritual. Play had a place inside their world of order, skill, and symbolism. Senet later took on symbolic associations with the journey after death in some contexts. A game that may once have been simple entertainment gained deeper religious meaning over time. This is very Egyptian in spirit, because ordinary objects could gradually become tied to sacred ideas and larger cosmic journeys. Hunting in marshes appears often in tomb art, where it could symbolize abundance, control, and mastery over disorder. These scenes are not only records of pastime, they also express ideas about the human ability to move through rich natural spaces and bring order out of complexity. River marshes were ecologically rich zones that supported fishing, birding, papyrus cutting, and transport. They were busy, productive landscapes full of plants, animals, and human activity. In many ways, the marshes were miniature worlds of abundance at the edges of the Nile. Cats were admired in Egypt for their grace and their usefulness in controlling pests. Their beauty and practical value made them especially welcome in domestic life. Over time, that closeness helped give cats a special place in both household and sacred imagination. Some cats were mummified and offered in temple contexts as votive gifts. This practice shows how deeply animal symbolism could enter Egyptian religion. A familiar domestic creature could also become part of the sacred exchange between worshipper and deity. Egyptian religion included many gods and goddesses, but it was never a single fixed system that stayed exactly the same everywhere. The leaves shifted across centuries, and different cities placed different divine figures at the center of worship. This flexibility is one reason Egyptian religion lasted so long. It could preserve old traditions while still adapting to political change, local identity, and new ways of understanding the sacred world. Nefertari, the chief queen of Ramesses II, was buried in a richly painted tomb that is still celebrated for the beauty of its decoration. The walls are covered with elegant color and carefully arranged scenes that show the refinement of New Kingdom funerary art. Her tomb reminds us that royal women could be honored with extraordinary care and that Egyptian painting could achieve both delicacy and grandeur at the same time. Royal tomb walls in the Valley of the Kings often showed solar and underworld books that mapped the king's journey after death. These were not random decorations placed for beauty alone. They were visual guides filled with sacred meaning, designed to help the dead ruler pass through darkness, danger, renewal, and eventual rebirth. In this way, the tomb became a protected and meaningful path, rather than a silent chamber. Crocodiles inspired both fear and reverence in ancient Egypt, especially in regions where the god Sobek was important. People knew these animals as powerful and dangerous creatures of the river, so they naturally carried a strong emotional presence. Egyptian religion did not avoid that danger. Instead, it turned it into something sacred, recognizing divine force in the same animal that could also threaten human life. Ibises and baboons were both connected with Thoth, showing how animal symbolism could merge with ideas of wisdom, writing, and sacred knowledge. These creatures were not chosen at random. In Egyptian thought, animals could express qualities, associations, and divine rules in ways that were both visual and meaningful. The sacred world was therefore often understood through close observation of the natural world. Cattle had economic, ritual, and symbolic value, and scenes of herds appear often in Egyptian tomb art. They mattered as sources of labor, wealth, and food, but also as visible signs of prosperity and order. When cattle appear in painted or carved scenes, they often help express abundance, careful management, and the stable life that Egyptians hoped would continue forever. The Apis bull at Memphis was treated as a sacred living manifestation with major cult importance. This shows that divine presence in Egypt was not always tied only to statues or distant myths. In some cases, a living animal could become the focus of devotion, ritual care, and public reverence. That idea gives Egyptian religion a vivid immediacy, where the sacred could appear in breathing, visible form. Egyptian deserts preserved monuments, burials, and settlements because dry conditions slowed decay. This is one of the quiet reasons so much Egyptian history still survives. The climate protected not only stone but also more fragile materials that would have vanished in wetter places. Thanks to this dryness, modern people can still encounter traces of lives lived thousands of years ago. Quarrying in the desert supplied limestone, sandstone, granite, and other stones used for monuments. The great temples and statues of Egypt did not simply appear beside the Nile by accident. They depended on organized extraction, far from the main river settlements. This means the desert was part of Egypt's creative and logistical world, providing the raw material for sacred and royal building. Expeditions into desert regions sought minerals, building stone, and trade routes, so the desert was never merely empty land beyond civilization. Egyptians moved through it with purpose, leaving records and organizing labor in harsh places. The desert could be difficult, but it was also useful and connected to the state's wider ambitions. It formed an outer working zone around the cultivated Nile world. Rock inscriptions left by expeditions provide evidence for travel, labor, and official activity far from the Nile Valley. These markings are valuable because they show people moving across difficult landscapes with clear intentions. Even in remote places, Egyptians recorded names, missions, and achievements, turning bare rock into another kind of archive. Ports on the Red Sea linked Egypt to overseas trade networks and expeditions. This reminds us that Egypt was not only a river civilization facing inward toward the Nile. It also had outward routes that connected it to wider maritime worlds. Through these ports, goods, people, and ideas could move beyond the river corridor and into long-distance exchange. A buried ancient port can preserve traces of maritime infrastructure that reveal Egypt's broader commercial world beyond the Nile itself. Such sites show that ships, supply systems, and organized expeditions were part of Egyptian reality. They deepen our understanding of Egypt as a civilization of movement as well as stability, capable of reaching outward while still grounded in the river valley. Egypt's monumental culture was not static, because each major period reused, restored, copied, or reinterpreted earlier models. This means later Egyptians often looked back at the past with respect and intention. They did not always try to invent something completely new. Instead, they reworked inherited forms, shaping tradition while keeping it alive. Middle Kingdom artists often adapted Old Kingdom conventions rather than abandoning them. That decision reflects a deep Egyptian respect for earlier achievements and established visual order. At the same time, adaptation meant those older forms were not simply frozen. They were studied, reused, and subtly reshaped to fit new times. Royal names were enclosed in cartouches, the oval frames that visually marked and protected them. A cartouche did more than highlight a name on the page or wall. It set that name apart, gave it visual importance, and helped express the idea that royal identity was precious, powerful, and worthy of protection. Names themselves carried power in Egyptian belief, which is one reason erasing a name could be treated as a serious attack on memory. To remove a name was not only to damage an inscription, it was to threaten remembrance, identity, and ongoing presence. This belief makes writing feel especially alive in Egypt, because words were tied to continued existence. Some rulers tried to reshape memory by defacing the monuments of predecessors or by reusing older building materials. Power in Egypt was not only about building, but also about controlling how the past would be seen. Altering earlier works could change public memory, weaken rivals, or place a new ruler inside an older, sacred landscape. Akhenaten's religious revolution was later rolled back, and his city was abandoned, which makes Amarna especially unusual and revealing. Because the experiment was so dramatic and then so strongly reversed, it left behind a rare snapshot of change in motion. Amarna helps historians see what happens when a civilization temporarily shifts course and then tries to return to familiar ground. Egyptian monuments often survived because later generations continued to respect or reuse sacred sites instead of wiping them away completely. This long chain of partial preservation matters a great deal. It means the ancient landscape remained meaningful even after political changes, which helped many places endure in altered but still recognizable form. Greek rulers after Alexander the Great adopted pharaonic imagery to legitimize their rule in Egyptian terms. They understood that governing Egypt effectively meant speaking to local ideas of kingship, sacred authority, and tradition. So even foreign dynasties often placed themselves inside the existing visual and ideological language of Egypt rather than ignoring it. Cleopatra VII belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was Macedonian Greek in origin, yet ruled Egypt through many local traditions. Her position reminds us that late Egyptian history was culturally layered rather than simple. Foreign origin and Egyptian rule were not mutually exclusive. Instead, political life in this period blended multiple identities and traditions. Even in Roman Egypt, mummification and temple cults continued in adapted forms. This shows the remarkable staying power of Egyptian religious habits and funerary values. Although political rulers changed, many older practices survived because they remained meaningful to the people who continued to live there. Ancient Egyptian religion lasted into the first centuries of the Common Era, which is an extraordinary span of continuity. Very few religious systems remain recognizable across such vast stretches of time. This long survival reflects not only devotion, but also flexibility, regional depth, and the ability of Egyptian traditions to endure through changing empires. The Egyptian language continued in later written forms, and Coptic preserved its final stage in a new script. This matters because it shows that ancient Egypt did not simply disappear all at once. Its language changed gradually, carrying older sounds and structures forward into later eras. In this sense, continuity survived not only in monuments and ritual, but in speech and writing. Archaeologists learn a great deal about elite ideology from monuments, but they often learn everyday life best from settlements, storage areas, refuse, and informal writing. Grand structures show how people wanted power to appear. Everyday remains show how people actually lived, worked, stored food, threw things away, and solved ordinary problems. Both kinds of evidence are necessary to understand Egypt fully. Egypt has preserved not only monumental stone art, but also fragile organic remains such as linen, wood, basketry, and food because of its dry climate. These softer materials bring ancient life much closer than stone alone can do. A woven basket, a piece of cloth, or preserved food can tell us about daily choices, touch, labor, and texture in ways that monuments cannot. Modern fascination with Egypt often begins with the pyramids, but much of the richest detail comes from quieter places like villages, records, and workshops. This is one of the loveliest truths about studying Egypt. The biggest wonders draw us in, but smaller traces often reveal the most intimate human details. The enormous amount of surviving written material from Egypt makes it one of the best documented societies of the ancient world. Because so many texts survive, historians can study not only kings and temples, but also transactions, complaints, training, offerings, and daily administration. The result is a civilization that often feels unusually present and knowable across long distances of time. Egyptian offering formulas were repeated with great consistency, helping preserve religious language over very long periods. Repetition in this case was not empty routine. It was a way of keeping sacred wording stable, recognizable, and effective. Familiar formulas made ritual continuity possible across generations that never met one another. Yet Egyptian religion was never purely repetitive, because local cults, political change, and theological merging continually reshaped it. This balance between repetition and adaptation is one of the deepest features of Egyptian civilization. It could preserve old phrases and still allow beliefs to shift in meaning and emphasis over time. Egyptian kings presented themselves as guardians against chaos, which made order one of the central ideas of political life. A ruler was expected not just to command, but to keep the world in proper balance. This idea helps explain why so much Egyptian royal art emphasizes stability, victory, ritual correctness, and the defeat of disorder. Tombs often included scenes of farming, hunting, cooking, and craftwork, because eternal life was imagined through familiar, useful activities. The afterlife was not pictured as an empty abstraction far removed from ordinary existence. Instead, it was often imagined as a perfected continuation of productive life, where abundance and order carried on without interruption. Egyptian art preserves many work processes in striking detail, including baking, brewing, weaving, carpentry, and metalworking. These images are valuable because they show knowledge in action. Through them, we can watch people grind grain, shape wood, pull thread, and manage tools, making the economy of daily life visible across the centuries. Inscriptions, ceilings, and storage systems show that administrative control could reach from village households to major temples and royal estates. Egypt's state power did not rest on royal will alone. It depended on systems of tracking, storing, and authorizing resources at many levels. Administrative order moved through containers, labels, and records as much as through proclamations. The state, temples, and households were deeply interconnected rather than fully separate spheres. Religion, economy, and domestic life overlapped continuously. A household could support temple obligations, a temple could control land and labor, and the state could shape both through administration. Egyptian society was therefore woven together rather than divided into neat compartments. Egyptian civilization repeatedly survived periods of decentralization and foreign rule by drawing on durable traditions of writing, cult, and kingship. This resilience is one of the great reasons Egypt lasted so long in recognizable form. Even when rulers changed or the country fragmented, older habits of meaning and organization remained available to rebuild with. Monumental permanence mattered in Egypt, but so did routine maintenance, storage, and paperwork, which are less visible yet just as essential. A temple might impress the eye, but it also needed food, labor, supplies, and records. The quieter side of civilization is often what allows the grander side to survive. Ancient Egypt's visual order can seem calm and timeless, yet the civilization itself was full of experimentation, political shifts, and regional variation. That tension is part of what makes Egypt so compelling. Its art often appears stable and composed, while its history reveals repeated change beneath the surface. Some of the best evidence for Egyptian humor and personality survives in informal drawings and private notes, rather than official monuments. Grand inscriptions tend to sound serious and idealized, but small personal traces can feel lively and unexpectedly familiar. Through them, the ancient world smiles, complains, and jokes in brief flashes. The survival of both royal propaganda and ordinary administrative scraps allows historians to compare idealized images with lived reality. One kind of source shows how power wanted to present itself. The other shows ration lists, complaints, corrections, and routine tasks. Together, they create a fuller and more honest picture of the civilization. Egypt's greatest monuments were built by a society that also cared deeply about bread rations, storage jars, tax records, and household routines. This contrast is worth resting with for a moment. The same civilization that raised pyramids also measured grain, tracked deliveries, and managed domestic life with care. Greatness rested on ordinary systems. One reason ancient Egypt feels so vivid is that it preserved both the grand scale of empire and the small scale of domestic life. We can see colossal statues and also sandals, notes, baskets, and work records. Few ancient civilizations feel so large and so intimate at the same time. The long continuity of Egypt did not mean sameness. Each era reworked inherited forms while still recognizing them as Egyptian. That is perhaps one of the gentlest lessons Egypt offers. Continuity is not the absence of change. It is the art of changing while keeping a recognizable shape. After the New Kingdom, Egypt passed through periods of divided rule: Libyan dynasties, Nubian kings, Assyrian invasion, Persian rule, and later Macedonian and Roman control. Yet even across all of these shifts, Egypt remained legible to itself in many important ways. Its history moved through change without losing all memory of what it had long been. Even under foreign dynasties, Egyptian religious traditions and artistic conventions showed remarkable resilience. New rulers often found it wiser to work within those traditions than to erase them completely. That persistence gives Egypt a rare kind of historical depth, where older forms keep echoing forward through later centuries. The New Kingdom produced many of Egypt's most famous rulers, including Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramesses II. Their names remain familiar, because their reigns left strong marks on architecture, warfare, religion, diplomacy, and memory. Together, they form a kind of bright ridge in Egyptian history that still catches the eye. Modern understanding of ancient Egypt depends on both texts and archaeology, because neither one alone can tell the whole story. Written words explain names, beliefs, and claims, while material remains reveal houses, bodies, tools, landscapes, and silent routines. When the two are read together, ancient Egypt becomes not just a legend of stone, but a lived human world. Ancient Egypt is one of history's clearest examples of how a river system can support centralized government, intensive agriculture, and very long cultural continuity. The Nile fed the land fed the people, and the people built institutions, beliefs, and monuments that could endure. In that slow meeting of water, birth, memory, and daily care, the whole civilization seems to settle into a quiet and lasting shape, and then softly rest there.